In the untamed expanse of the Arizona Territory, where the scorched earth meets the endless sky, a lone figure stands on the wraparound porch of a modest farmhouse. Sarah Mitchell's weathered hands rest on the smooth wooden railing as she surveys her land, the setting sun painting the vast desert in shades of amber and gold. The gentle breeze carries the scent of sage and desert wildflowers, a sweet contrast to the harsh landscape that stretches before her. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. To anyone passing by, she appears to be nothing more than another widow trying to keep her late husband's dream alive. Just another woman struggling against the merciless nature of the frontier. But beneath her calm exterior lies a truth that would make even the most hardened outlaws think twice about crossing her path. Long before she was Sarah Mitchell, loving wife and homesteader, she was Shadow Hand Sarah, the most feared gunslinger west of the Mississippi. The sound of approaching horses breaks the evening silence, their hooves kicking up clouds of dust that drift across the sun-baked earth. Sarah's keen eyes narrow as she spots 5 riders approaching from the north, their figures dark against the setting sun. They ride with purpose, their horses moving at a steady pace that speaks of experience and intent. These aren't travelers looking for shelter, nor are they lost cowboys seeking directions. Sarah knows their kind all too well. Her fingers brush against the smooth pearl handle of the revolver concealed beneath her apron. It's been 5 years since she last drew that weapon in anger. 5 years since she buried both her gun and her asked to build a life with Thomas Mitchell. But as the riders draw closer, Sarah can feel the old instinct stirring, like a sleeping rattler about to strike. The lead rider, a broad-shouldered man with a blood-red bandana around his neck, pulls his horse to a stop 20 paces from her porch. His companions spread out behind him, a deliberate formation that Sarah recognizes immediately. It's the kind of positioning that gives them the best angles for a firefight. "Evening, ma'am," the leader calls out, his voice carrying a false note of politeness that sets Sarah's teeth on edge. "Name's Marcus Fletcher. My associates and I represent some interested parties who've taken notice of your fine piece of property here." Sarah doesn't move from her position on the porch, her expression remaining neutral as she studies the men before her. She notes the way they carry themselves, the placement of their weapons, the subtle signs that mark them as more than common bandits. These are professional gunmen, hired muscle sent to do someone else's dirty work. This land isn't for sale. "Mr. Fletcher," Sarah replies, her voice steady and clear. "Never has been, never will be." Fletcher's polite smile doesn't waver, but his eyes harden. "Now, ma'am, I don't think you understand the opportunity we're presenting here. Times are changing. The railroad's coming through these parts, and our employer is offering fair compensation for properties in its path. It'd be a shame if something were to happen to your lovely home while you're considering the offer." Sarah's mind races, even as she maintains her composed exterior. The railroad. It's always the railroad. She'd heard whispers in town about land grabs happening across the territory, about honest folks being forced off their property by threats and violence. The railroad companies were buying up everything they could, and when money didn't work, they sent men like Fletcher to make their point with lead and fire. "I understand perfectly well, Mr. Fletcher," Sarah responds, her tone cooling, "and my answer remains the same. This land belongs to me and my late husband's memory. I suggest you and your associates move along." A low chuckle ripples through the group of riders. Fletcher's smile turns cruel as he adjusts his position in the saddle. "A widow living all alone out here. It's dangerous, ma'am. Accidents happen. Fires start. Sometimes people just disappear." Sarah feels the familiar calm settling over her, the same stillness that used to come before a gunfight. Her right hand remains close to her concealed weapon, but she doesn't draw. Not yet. These men don't know who they're dealing with, and that's an advantage she intends to keep until the last possible moment. "I've lived with danger before, Mr. Fletcher," she says quietly. "I'm quite comfortable with it." Something in her tone makes Fletcher pause. For a brief moment, uncertainty flickers across his face as he studies her more carefully. Sarah knows. That look, she's seen it countless times before. When men realize that something isn't quite what it seems, that there's a shadow of threat behind a seemingly harmless facade. "Boys," Fletcher says after a moment, his voice hardening, "I think the widow needs a demonstration of how serious we are about this offer." Two of his men dismount, their spurs jingling as their boots hit the dirt. They're young, eager, with the kind of confidence that comes from never having met their match. Sarah watches them approach, noting their swagger, the way they keep their hands near their holsters. They're killers, but they're not as skilled as they think they are. "Last chance to reconsider, ma'am," Fletcher calls out. "My men here can be quite persuasive when they need to be." Sarah's expression doesn't change, but something shifts in her stance. A subtle readjustment that would be invisible to most, but speaks volumes to anyone who knows what to look for. She's no longer just standing on her porch. She's positioning herself for what's to come. "Mr. Fletcher," she says, her voice carrying a note of finality, "I'm going to give you and your men one chance to turn around and ride away. What happens next is entirely your choice." Fletcher's face darkens with anger. He's not used to being defied, especially not by a lone widow on a remote homestead. He raises his hand, about to signal his men forward, when something makes him hesitate. There's something about the woman's posture, the steadiness of her gaze, that triggers a warning in the back of his mind. But it's too late. His men are already moving, their hands reaching for their guns, confident in their ability to intimidate one helpless woman. They don't notice how Sarah's right hand moves with practiced precision and don't register the significance of her stance until it's far too late. The first shot rings out before either man can clear their holsters. Sarah's movement is fluid, almost graceful, as she draws her revolver and fires in one smooth motion. The nearest man drops without a sound, a look of surprise frozen on his face. The second man manages to get his gun halfway up before Sarah's. Second shot takes him in the chest, the impact throwing him backward into the dust. Fletcher and his remaining men sit frozen in their saddles, their faces masks of shock and disbelief. Sarah stands on the porch, her revolver steady in her hand, as the echo of gunshots fades into the evening air. There's no trace of the widow now. Her posture, her presence, everything about her speaks of a deadly skill that cannot be hidden. Shadow. "Sarah," Fletcher breathes, recognition finally dawning in his eyes. "They said you were dead." "Not dead, Mr. Fletcher," Sarah replied calmly, her gun trained on his chest. "Just retired. Now, I believe we were discussing you and your men, leaving my property." The remaining riders exchanged nervous glances. The legend of Shadowhand. Sarah was well known throughout the territories. Stories of a woman gunslinger who could draw and fire faster than any man, who never missed her mark, who had faced down some of the most notorious outlaws in the West, and lived to tell the tale. They had all heard the stories, but none had believed them until now. Fletcher's face has gone pale, his earlier bravado evaporating like morning dew in the desert sun. We didn't know," he stammers. "The company never said." "The company sent you to threaten a widow," Sarah cuts him off, her voice sharp as a razor, "to force me off my land through intimidation and violence. Tell me, Mr. Fletcher, do you think they'll be as understanding of failure as I'm being right?" Now, the question hangs in the air like gunsmoke. Fletcher looks down at his fallen men, then back at Sarah, his mind visibly racing as he weighs his options. Finally, he swallows hard and begins to back his horse away. "This isn't over," he manages to say, though his voice lacks conviction. "The company..." The company will learn what others before them have learned, Sarah interrupts. This land is mine. Anyone who tries to take it will answer me. Spread the word, Mr. Fletcher, Shadow Hand. Sarah isn't dead. She's just been waiting. The remaining riders turn their horses and gallop away, leaving their fallen comrades in the dust. Sarah watches them go, her gun still ready, until they disappear into the gathering dusk. Only then does she lower her weapon, though her posture remains alert and watchful. As the sound of hoofbeats fades into the distance, Sarah knows that this is just the beginning. She had hoped to leave her past behind, to live out her days in peace on the land she and Thomas had loved. But the frontier has its own plans, and now that her secret is out, there will be more coming, more men, more guns, more violence. Sarah steps off the porch, her boots crunching softly in the dirt as she approaches the fallen men. Their faces are frozen in that final moment of surprise, that split second when they realize their mistake. She's seen that look before, too many times to count. With practiced efficiency, she searches their bodies, finding what she expected: railroad company. Documents, a letter of authorization signed by a William Harrison, president of the Western Pacific Railroad. The sun has almost disappeared behind the mountains now, painting the sky in deep purples and blues. Sarah tucks the papers into her apron pocket and begins the grim task of dealing with the bodies. She's done this before too, though not for many years. The desert is vast, and it keeps its secrets well. As she works, her mind drifts to Thomas. Sweet, gentle Thomas, who had loved her despite knowing what she was, who had believed she could be more than just a killer. He had shown her a different kind of life, taught her about farming, about building something instead of destroying it. They had been happy here, truly happy, until the fever took him 2 winters ago. The sound of a wagon approaching pulls Sarah from her memories. Her hand moves to her gun, but she relaxes slightly when she recognizes the familiar creak of old wheels and the steady clip-clop of a particular pair of workhorses. Only one person would be visiting at this hour. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Evening, Daniel," she calls out, not turning around. Daniel Anderson, the owner of the general store in nearby Copper Creek, pulls his wagon to a stop. He's an older man, his hair more gray than brown now, with kind eyes that have seen their share of frontier hardships. He takes in the scene before him: Sarah, the bodies that disturbed Earth, without comment. "Heard shots," he says simply. "Thought you might need some help." Sarah finally turns to face him, studying his expression. Daniel had been Thomas's friend before he died, and he'd appointed himself as her unofficial protector afterward, though she'd never needed protecting. He's one of the few people who knows her true identity, and he's kept her secret faithfully. "Railroad men," she explains, gesturing to the papers in her pocket. "They're getting bolder." Daniel climbs down from his wagon, his movements stiff from age and a long day's work. "Harrison's bunch?" he asks, though it's not really a question. "They've been buying up land all through the territory, or taking it when buying doesn't work." "They sent Fletcher and his men to persuade me," Sarah says, her voice dry. "It didn't go as they planned." Daniel nods, already moving to help her with the grim task at hand. They work in silence for a while, the desert night growing cooler around them. Finally, when they're finished, Daniel speaks again. "This will bring more trouble," he says, not unkindly. "Harrison's not a man who takes defeat well. When Fletcher reports back—" "If he reports back," Sarah interrupts, "men like Fletcher sometimes decide to try their luck elsewhere after a setback like this." "And if he doesn't?" Daniel asks. "Harrison will just send more men, different men, worse men." Sarah wipes her hands clean on a cloth, her movements deliberate. "Then they'll learn the same lesson these two did. This land is mine, Daniel. Thomas. And I built something here, something worth protecting. I won't let them take it." Daniel sighs, climbing back onto his wagon. "Just be careful, Sarah. The railroad has deep pockets and a long reach, and there are plenty of gunmen out there who'd jump at the chance to test themselves against the legend of Shadow Hand Sarah. Sarah watches him drive away, his words echoing in her mind. He's right, of course. By defending her land, she's drawn attention to herself. The quiet life she's built here, the peace she's found in working the land and honoring Thomas's memory. All of it is at risk now. But as she walks back to her house in the gathering darkness, Sarah feels a familiar resolve settling over her. She's worked too hard, lost too much to give up now. If William Harrison and his railroad want her land, they'll have to face what Fletcher and his men face today. She may be a widow, but she's also Shadow Hand Sarah, and she hasn't forgotten how to fight. Dawn breaks over the Arizona territory, painting the desert in shades of rose and gold. Sarah Mitchell stands in her kitchen, the morning light streaming through windows that Thomas had insisted on making larger than usual. A home needs light, he'd always said, just like a soul needs hope. The memory brings a faint smile to her face as she loads fresh cartridges into her revolver. The events of the previous evening have stirred something in her that she's kept buried for too long. As she works, her mind drifts to a time before this peaceful homestead, before Thomas, when she wore a different name and carried a different kind of reputation. She had been barely 17 when she first learned to shoot, taught by her father, after outlaws killed her mother on their small Kansas farm. John Bedford had been a former cavalry scout, and he made sure his daughter could protect herself in a world that showed little mercy to the unprepared. Sarah had learned quickly, discovering she had a natural talent that surprised even her father. Her hands were steady, her aim true, and most importantly, she could remain calm in situations that made hardened men panic. The sound of chickens scratching in the yard draws her attention back to the present. Sarah moves to the window, watching the morning routine of her small farm while keeping one eye on the horizon. The railroad men won't waste time, she knows. William Harrison's reputation for swift and merciless action is well known throughout the territory. A knock at the door breaks her reverie. Sarah's hand moves instinctively to her gun before she recognizes the particular pattern. 3 quick raps, followed by 2 slower ones. It's Mary Anderson, Daniel's daughter. "Brought you some fresh bread," Mary says as Sarah opens the door. She's a pretty young woman of 22, with her father's kind eyes and her late mother's determination. "Pa told me about what happened last night." Sarah accepts the bread, still warm from the Andersons' ovens. "Your father should be more careful about what he shares," she says, though there's no real reproach in her voice. Mary follows her inside, moving with the familiarity of someone who's spent many hours in this kitchen. "The whole town's talking about it already," she says, filling the kettle for tea without being asked. 3 riders came through Copper Creek at dawn, heading east. They look scared, Miss Sarah, really scared. Sarah places the bread on the table, her expression thoughtful. Only 3 riders, so Fletcher had split up his remaining men. Smart, if he was planning to report back to Harrison. Harder to track that way. "Tell me about the railroad men," Sarah says, sitting down at the kitchen table. "What else have you heard?" Mary's face grows serious as she sets out cups for tea. They've been buying up land all along the proposed rail line, started about 6 months ago, offering fair prices at first. But lately, she hesitates, glancing at Sarah. Lately, they've been less friendly about it. The Murphy family, over by Stone Creek, their barn burned down last week. No one can prove it was Harrison's men, but Sarah nods slowly. It fits with what she's heard. William Harrison had made his fortune during the war, supplying the Union Army with everything from horses to ammunition. Now he was using that wealth to build his railroad empire, and he wasn't about to let a few stubborn homesteaders stand in his way. "What about Harrison himself?" Sarah asks, watching Mary carefully. "Have you seen him?" "Once," Mary replies, pouring the tea. "He came through town about a month ago. Fancy suit, expensive horse, 2 gun hands with him that looked like they'd killed before and wouldn't mind doing it again. He stopped at the store, talked to Pa about selling. Pa told him the store's been in our family for 3 generations and wasn't for sale at any price. Sarah can picture it, William Harrison, with his Eastern education and Western ambitions, trying to convince Daniel Anderson to give up his life's work. It wouldn't have gone well. Daniel was as stubborn as the rocky soil they farmed. Did Harrison threaten your father? Mary's hands tighten around her teacup. Not directly. But he said something about how unfortunate it would be if the new railroad town was built somewhere else, somewhere that would leave Copper Creek to dry up and blow away like so many other frontier towns. The threat was clear enough. Without the railroad, towns like Copper Creek could wither and die. Harrison was offering prosperity with one hand while holding destruction in the other. "Miss Sarah," Mary says after a moment, her voice quieter now, "Pa told me. He told me who you used to be, about Shadow Hand Sarah." Sarah stays silent, studying the young woman's face. She sees no fear there, only curiosity and something else. Hope, maybe. "The stories they tell about you in town," Mary continues, "about how you faced down the Clayton gang single-handed, how you brought justice to the territories when the law wouldn't or couldn't. Are they true?" "Some are," Sarah admits, her voice level. "Others have grown in the telling. That's the way of things out here. Truth and legend tend to get tangled up together." Mary leans forward, her eyes intense. "Then you can help us. The whole territory's scared of Harrison and his men. Nobody dares stand up to them. But you—" "I'm not that person anymore," Sarah interrupts, though even as she says it, she knows it's not entirely true. "I hung up my guns when I married Thomas. We built something different here, something peaceful." "But Thomas is gone," Mary says softly, reaching across the table to touch Sarah's hand. "And Harrison won't stop. He'll keep pushing, keep threatening, keep burning people out until he gets what he wants, unless someone stops him." Sarah withdraws her hand gently, rising to check the horizon through the window again. The morning sun has climbed higher, burning away the last traces of dawn's coolness. In the distance, she can see dust rising, riders approaching from the east. "Someone's coming," she says, her voice changing subtly. "Mary, I want you to go out the back door and ride straight home. Don't stop for anything." Mary stands quickly, recognizing the tone of command in Sarah's voice. "But—" "No arguments," Sarah cuts her off. "Whatever happens next, I don't want you anywhere near it. Tell your father to keep an eye on the store. Harrison's men might try to send a message." As Mary slips out the back door, Sarah moves to the front of the house, positioning herself where she can see the approaching riders while remaining partially hidden. There are 6 of them, moving fast, kicking up trails of dust that streak across the morning sky. They're not bothering to hide their approach, which means either they're very confident or very stupid. The lead rider becomes clear as they draw closer. A woman, to Sarah's surprise, wearing men's clothes and riding astride. Her hair is the color of copper, pulled back severely from a face that's both beautiful and hard. Sarah recognizes her immediately, though they've never met. Everyone in the territories knows of Charlotte "Red" Harrison, William Harrison's younger sister, and the true steel behind his railroad empire. Sarah feels her pulse quicken, not with fear but with anticipation. If Red Harrison herself has come, then the game has changed. The woman's reputation for ruthlessness matches her brother's ambition, and there are whispers about her that make even hardened gunmen nervous. As she watches the riders approach, Sarah reflects on Mary's words. The young woman was right. Harrison wouldn't stop, couldn't stop. His vision of a railroad empire required absolute control of the land it would cross, and he wouldn't let anyone stand in his way. The question wasn't whether there would be a fight, but how many people would be hurt before it was over. Sarah checks her revolver one last time, feeling the familiar weight of it against her palm. She had tried to leave this life behind and had promised Thomas she would find another way to live. But sometimes the past doesn't let go, and sometimes the only way forward is through the smoke and thunder of gunfire. The riders are closer now, their features becoming distinct in the morning light. Red Harrison sits her horse like someone born, to the saddle, her gun belt riding low on her hips in the style of a professional gunfighter. The men with her are different from Fletcher's crew. Older, harder, the kind of men who don't need to prove themselves because they've already done so many times over. Sarah takes a deep breath, settling into that place of perfect calm she had discovered so many years ago. She had hoped to avoid this and had tried to build a life away from violence and death. But the frontier has its own rules, its own demands, and sometimes the only choice is to meet force with force. The sound of hoofbeats grows louder as Red Harrison and her men approach the house. Sarah remains still, watching and waiting. Whatever comes next will shape not just her future, but the future of the entire territory. The quiet widow and the legendary gunslinger are about to become one person again, and God help anyone who stands in her way. Through the window, Sarah catches glimpses of the weapons the riders carry. Not just standard revolvers, but Winchester rifles in their saddle holsters. These aren't common thugs, they're well-equipped professionals. One man carries what appears to be a scope-mounted Sharps rifle, a sharpshooter's weapon. Red Harrison clearly isn't taking any chances. Sarah's mind flashes back to the last time she faced a skilled sharpshooter. It had been in Montana Territory during a particularly vicious range war. The memory of that fight, of the patience and cunning it had taken to outmaneuver someone who could kill from hundreds of yards away, might prove useful now. The morning breeze carries snippets of conversation as the riders draw closer. Red's voice cuts through the air, sharp and commanding. "Remember, we need her alive if possible. William wants to handle this personally." Sarah's lips thin into a tight line. So that's their game. Take her captive, make an example of her. William Harrison probably wants to demonstrate what happens to those who defy his will. It's not a bad strategy, except for one thing. Sarah Mitchell has never been taken alive, and Shadow Hand Sarah never will be. She moves away from the window, circling through the house to the back door. The barn offers better positioning, and she knows every inch of this property. 5 years of working the land, maintaining fences and handling livestock have given her an intimate knowledge of every approach, every line of sight, every potential advantage. As she slips out the back door, Sarah reflects on the irony of the situation. Thomas had chosen this land partially for its defensive position, not because he was expecting trouble, but because his years as a surveyor had taught him to appreciate good sightlines and natural barriers. He would have appreciated how those same features might now help save his widow's life. The barn door opens silently. Sarah keeps the hinges well oiled, another habit from her previous life. Inside, the familiar smells of hay and leather fill the air. Her horse, a sturdy bay gelding, named Thunder, shifts in his stall, sensing her tension. Sarah moves to the back of the barn, where a ladder leads to the hayloft. From this elevated position, she has a clear view of the approaching riders through gaps in the barn's weathered boards. Red Harrison has pulled ahead of her men, her copper, hair gleaming in the morning sun. There's an elegant confidence in her posture that speaks of someone used to being obeyed without question. Sarah checks her ammunition one final time. Besides the revolver, she has a Winchester rifle hidden in the hayloft, another remnant of her past that she couldn't quite bring herself to give up. Thomas had known about it, had understood why she kept it, even after they agreed she would leave her gunfighting days behind. A person doesn't stop being who they are just because they choose a different path, he had told her once. The skills you learned, the strength you built, those aren't things to be ashamed of. It's how you use them that matters. The riders are almost to the house now. Sarah can hear Red Harrison giving final instructions to her men. Two are dismounting to approach the house from different angles, while the sharpshooter is moving to higher ground with his sharps rifle. The remaining three, including Red, stay mounted, spreading out to cover potential escape routes. It's a good tactical approach, Sarah has to admit. If she were still in the house, she'd be effectively surrounded. But she's not in the house, and that changes everything. From her position in the barn, she can see what Red Harrison can't. The subtle signs that Mary Anderson left during her escape. Tracks that might lead the raiders to think Sarah fled with her. The morning sun climbs higher, and Sarah settles into position, her breathing slow and steady. She's not the same person who earned the name Shadow Hand Sarah all those years ago. She's older now, maybe wiser, certainly more patient. But as she watches Red Harrison's men move into position, she knows one thing hasn't changed. Her ability to read a situation, to see the moments when violence becomes inevitable. The quiet of the morning is about to be shattered, and when it is, Red Harrison will learn what others before her have learned, that legends sometimes have sharp teeth, and that the most dangerous predator is often the one you don't see coming until it's too late. Red Harrison's boots hit the dirt with a soft thud as she dismounts, the sound carrying clearly through the morning air. She adjusts her gun belt with practiced ease, the pearl-handled Colt at her hip gleaming in the sunlight. Unlike the men she leads, Red doesn't bother trying to use the house for cover. She walks straight up the center of the yard, radiating the kind of confidence that comes from never having met your match. From her position in the barn's hayloft, Sarah watches through a narrow gap between the boards. Red's men are spreading out according to their orders, but their movements tell Sarah everything she needs to know about them. The sharpshooter, now positioned on a rocky outcrop to the east, keeps adjusting his collar, a sign of nervousness he probably doesn't even realize he's showing. The two men approaching the house from opposite sides are experienced, but they're used to urban environments. Their boots scuff too loudly on the hard-packed earth, lacking the quiet step of men accustomed to open country. "Mrs. Mitchell," Red calls out, her voice carrying a hint of southern refinement that seems at odds with her rugged appearance. "I believe we need to have a conversation about recent events. I'm sure we can reach an understanding that benefits everyone involved." Sarah remains silent, watching as Red reaches the porch. The woman's copper hair catches the morning light, creating an almost ethereal glow around her head. It's an effect Sarah's sure Red has used to her advantage before. Beauty can be as effective a weapon as any gun. "Your reputation precedes you, Mrs. Mitchell," Red continues, mounting the porch steps with deliberate slowness. "Or should I say, Shadow Hand Sarah? My brother William was quite impressed when he learned of your true identity. He's very interested in meeting you personally." The name drops into the morning air like a stone into still water, creating ripples of tension among Red's men. They've all heard the stories, Sarah realizes. They know they're not just dealing with a stubborn widow anymore. Red reaches the front door, trying the handle and finding it locked. "You know, it's fascinating how legends grow in the telling. Some say you once took down 12 men in a single gunfight. Others claim you can shoot a man's gun from his hand without drawing blood. My personal favorite is the story about how you tracked the militant gang through a blizzard, found them hiding in an abandoned mine, and left them tied up for the marshal to find." Sarah shifts position slightly, keeping Red in view while monitoring the movements of her men. The sharpshooter has settled into his position, his sharps rifle trained on the house. The other men have completed their circle, effectively surrounding the building. They think they have her cornered, trapped in her own home. "The funny thing about legends," Red continues, her voice taking on a harder edge, "is that they often end badly. People start believing their own stories, thinking they're invincible. That's usually when they make mistakes." With a sudden motion that speaks of years of practice, Red draws her Colt and fires 3 rapid shots through the front door's lock. The sound echoes across the yard, sending a flock of startled birds wheeling into the sky. Red kicks the door open, stepping inside with her gun ready. Sarah allows herself a small smile. Red Harrison is good, better than her brother's usual hired guns. But she's making the same mistake many others have made before her, assuming she knows where her target is through gaps in the barn wall. Sarah can see the confusion spreading among Red's men as they realize the house is empty. The sharpshooter shifts his aim, scanning windows and doorways. The other men tighten their circle, uncertain now. Search every room. Red's voice carries from inside the house, sharp with frustration. She has to be here somewhere. Sarah eases the Winchester rifle into position, her movements slow and controlled to avoid any telltale sound. The morning sun has risen higher, creating harsh shadows that work to her advantage. She takes a moment to study the tactical situation, analyzing angles and distances, just as her father had taught her so many years ago. The sharpshooter is her first concern. His elevated position makes him dangerous, but it also makes him vulnerable. He's silhouetted against the sky, a mistake no experienced frontier hunter would make. The two men covering the sides of the house are too focused on the windows, their attention drawn by the sound of their companions searching inside. The remaining man, guarding the horses, has grown visibly nervous, his hand hovering near his gun, as his eyes dart between the house and the surrounding landscape. Sarah's finger rests lightly on the Winchester's trigger as she waits for the perfect moment. Patience has always been her greatest weapon, the ability to wait until everything aligns just right, until the enemy's confidence becomes their weakness. Inside the house, she can hear Red Harrison's boots on the wooden floors, moving from room to room. The woman's frustration is evident in the sound of doors being thrown open, furniture being moved. Sarah knows what she'll find, a house that shows signs of recent occupation but offers no clue to its owner's whereabouts. Check the back. Red's voice carries through the open door. She might have slipped out when she saw us coming. Two of the men move toward the rear of the house, their earlier caution beginning to fade as their search proves fruitless. It's another mistake, letting frustration override training. Sarah has seen it happen countless times before, has used it to her advantage more times than she can count. The moment arrives with the subtle shift of wind, a change in the air that any experienced hunter would recognize. The sharpshooter on the ridge adjusts his position, momentarily taking his eye from his scope to wipe sweat from his brow. The men at the back of the house have their attention focused on a set of tracks that Mary Anderson deliberately left when she fled. The man with the horses has turned slightly, responding to a sound from within the house. Sarah's first shot takes the sharpshooter clean off his perch. Before his body hits the ground, she's already shifting her aim, the Winchester's action working smoothly as she chambers another round. The second shot catches one of the men at the back of the house in the shoulder, spinning him around and down. The remaining men react instantly, diving for cover, but they're shooting at the house, where they think she must be. Sarah's third shot drops the man with the horses before he can get a single round off. Red Harrison's voice cuts through the chaos. "The barn! She's in the damn barn!" Sarah's already moving, rolling away from her firing position as bullets tear through the wooden walls. She'd known this advantage wouldn't last long. Red Harrison hasn't survived this long by being slow to adapt. The remaining men are repositioning, trying to get angles on the barn while staying in cover. Sarah counts shots, tracking the different weapons by their distinctive sounds. The man she hit in the shoulder is down but still conscious, trying to drag himself to safety. The other two are laying down covering fire, while Red, a flash of copper hair through a gap in the wall, warns Sarah just in time. Red Harrison has circled around to the barn's side door, moving with the kind of speed and silence that marks a truly dangerous opponent. The door creaks open slowly, and Sarah can hear Red's soft footsteps on the barn floor below. "Impressive shooting," Red calls out, her voice echoing in the barn's interior. "But you're just delaying the inevitable." "My brother always gets what he wants, Mrs. Mitchell. Always." Sarah moves silently through the hayloft. Years of experience guiding her movements. Red is good, maybe even good enough to have earned her own legends if things had been different. But Sarah has spent 5 years working in this barn, knows every creaky board, every shadow, every angle. "You know what I think?" Red continues, moving deeper into the barn. "I think the legends about Shadow Hand Sarah are just that. Legends. Stories people tell around campfires to make themselves feel better. About living in a lawless land. Because the real Shadow Hand Sarah would never have given up her guns to play at being a farmer's wife. The words are meant to provoke, to make Sarah angry enough to make a mistake. It's a good tactic, but Sarah learned long ago to use anger as a tool, not let it use her. She shifts position again, moving toward the back of the hayloft where the morning sun creates a pool of shadow. Below, Red's boots scrape softly on the barn floor as she approaches the ladder to the hayloft. "What would your dear departed husband think, I wonder, knowing his peaceful widow is about to start a war she can't possibly win?" Sarah's response, when it comes, is as quiet as falling snow. "Thomas knew exactly who I was, Miss Harrison. He also knew something you and your brother don't seem to understand." Red's boots pause on the ladder's first rung. "And what's that?" Sometimes the quiet ones are the most dangerous. The words hang in the air for a moment, and then everything happens at once. Red lunges up the ladder, her Colt clearing leather with impressive speed. But Sarah is already moving, her own gun seeming to materialize in her hand as if by magic. The sound of their shots blend together, a single thunderclap that sends the barn's resident birds exploding through the rafters in panic. Red Harrison staggers backward, her shot going wide as Sarah's bullet finds its mark. The woman's pearl-handled Colt clatters to the barn floor as she clutches her shoulder, her face a mask of shock and disbelief. "That's not possible," Red gasps, her legs giving way as she slumps against the ladder. "Nobody's that fast, nobody." Sarah steps into view, her gun trained steadily on Red's chest. "The legends aren't all true," she says quietly, "but some of them are." Outside, the remaining men have fallen silent, waiting for orders that won't come. Sarah keeps her gun trained on Red while retrieving the woman's fallen Colt with her free hand. It's a fine weapon, custom-made by the look of it, with intricate engravings along the barrel. "Your men have 2 choices," Sarah says, her voice carrying clearly through the barn's open door. "They can leave now, taking their wounded with them, or they can join their employer here in the barn. Either way, this ends today." Red's face has gone pale from blood loss, but her eyes remain defiant. "You're signing your own death warrant, Mitchell. William won't stop until he has what he wants. He'll send more men, better men." "Better than you?" Sarah asks, genuine curiosity in her voice. "I've been watching you work, Miss Harrison. You're good, better than most I've faced, but you made one crucial mistake." "And what's that?" Red manages through gritted teeth. "You thought because I chose peace, I'd forgotten how to fight." Sarah moves to the hayloft window, keeping Red in her peripheral vision. "Your brother's not the first powerful man to try to take what isn't his. He won't be the last. But this land, it's worth fighting for." The sound of horses moving catches her attention. The remaining men have made their choice, gathering their wounded companion and mounting up. Sarah watches them retreat, their silhouettes diminishing against the morning sky. "They'll tell William what happened here," Red says, pressing harder against her wounded shoulder, "about how fast you are, how you outmaneuvered us. It won't matter. He'll just send more men, again and again, until either you're dead or you give up." Sarah turns back to Red, studying the woman thoughtfully. "You really believe in him, don't you? In his vision for the railroad, for the territory, he's bringing civilization to the frontier, Red responds, a hint of passion breaking through her pain. Progress can't be stopped by one stubborn widow with a fast gun. Civilization, Sarah repeats softly. Is that what you call burning people out of their homes, threatening families who've worked their land for generations? Thomas believed in progress too, Miss Harrison, but he believed it should lift people up, not crush them underfoot. A cloud passes over the sun, momentarily dimming the light in the barn. Sarah moves closer to Red, noting how the woman tenses despite her wound. I'm going to do you a courtesy, Sarah says, because you've earned it with your skill, if not your choices. I'm going to let you deliver a message to your brother personally. Red's eyes narrow suspiciously. What message? Tell him that Shadow Hand Sarah isn't just a legend. Tell him that this land and the people who live on it are under my protection. Now, if he wants to build his railroad, he'll need to find another way, one that doesn't involve threatening honest folk or burning them out of their homes. And if he doesn't listen, Sarah's expression hardens, then remind him that legends often have their roots in truth. And the truth about me? It's far more dangerous than any story told around a campfire. Outside, the morning has grown still. Again, the only sound the gentle rustle of wind through the barn's weathered boards. Sarah helps Red to her feet, keeping a careful watch as the woman struggles to maintain her balance. You should see a doctor in Copper Creek, Sarah advises. The wound's clean. You'll heal if you take care of it properly. Red takes a stumbling step toward the ladder, then pauses. You know this isn't over. William, he's not like other men you've faced. He has connections in Washington, friends in high places. I know, Sarah replies simply, but he needs to understand something. The frontier isn't like the East. Out here, a person's word is their bond, and their courage is their currency. All his money, all his connections, they don't mean much when the guns come out. Red makes her way down the ladder slowly, each movement careful and measured. At the bottom, she turns to look up at Sarah one last time. For what it's worth, she says, I hope I'm wrong about how this ends. Sarah watches from the hayloft as Red Harrison mounts her horse with difficulty and rides away, her figure growing smaller against the vast desert landscape. The morning sun has climbed higher, burning away the last traces of dawn's coolness. There's work to be done, bodies to be dealt with, damage to be repaired. But for now, Sarah stands in the quiet barn, feeling the weight of the choice she's just made. The peaceful life she's built here has changed irrevocably, transformed by gunsmoke and blood into something else entirely. Thomas had always said that a person's true character shows in the choices they make when everything is on the line. Sarah's choice is made now, for better or worse. Shadow Hand. Sarah isn't just a legend anymore. She's a promise of protection for those who can't protect themselves, and a warning to those who would prey upon them. The war for the territories. Future has begun, and Sarah Mitchell intends to see it through to the end, one way or another. By midday, dark clouds gather over Copper Creek, bringing with them the promise of a rare summer storm. The town's single street is unusually busy, filled with people discussing the morning's events in hushed, excited tones. Word travels fast in the territories, especially when it involves gunfire and the resurrection of old legends. Sarah rides into town on Thunder, her presence causing conversations to halt mid-sentence. Eyes follow her progress down the street, some filled with awe, others with fear, and more than a few with calculation. She guides her horse to Anderson's General store, where Daniel waits on the porch, his weathered face creased with concern. Red Harrison was here an hour ago, he says without preamble as Sarah dismounts. Doc Jenkins patched her up. She didn't say much, but her face said plenty. And what did that tell you? Sarah asks, tying Thunder to the hitching post. That William Harrison's about to find out his sister isn't invincible. Daniel glances up and down the street before continuing in a lower voice. There's something else you should know. Judge Carlton arrived on the morning stage. Sarah's expression doesn't change, but her eyes sharpen with interest. Edward Carlton is the circuit judge for this part of the territory, known for his strict adherence to the law and his close friendship with William Harrison. Interesting timing, she comments, following Daniel into the store. The interior is cool and dim, smelling of coffee, leather, and dried goods. Mary Anderson looks up from where she's stocking shelves, her face lighting up at the sight of Sarah. But before she can speak, another voice cuts through the air. Mrs. Mitchell, or should I say, Shadow Hand Sarah. Judge Carlton steps out from behind a display of canned goods, his black coat and string tie marking him as distinctly out of place in the frontier town. He's a tall man with silver hair and sharp features, carrying himself with the authority of someone used to having the final word. Judge Carlton, Sarah acknowledges with a slight nod. Long ride from Prescott. Indeed. The judge moves closer, studying her with keen interest. I must say, you've caused quite a stir. William Harrison is a personal friend of mine, and he's quite concerned about recent events on your property. Sarah meets his gaze steadily. Is that why you're here, Your Honor, to express William Harrison's concerns? I'm here, Carlton says, his voice taking on a more formal tone, because shots were fired this morning, resulting in several injuries and significant property damage. As the legal authority in this territory, it's my duty to investigate such incidents. Then you'll want to investigate the burned homesteads as well, Sarah replied calmly, and the families who've been threatened off their land. All in the name of Harrison's Railroad. The judge's expression hardens slightly. Progress requires sacrifice, Mrs. Mitchell. The railroad will bring civilization to these territories, open up new opportunities for commerce and settlement. Surely your late husband, being a surveyor, would have understood the importance of such development. Thomas understood the difference between progress and theft, Sarah says, her voice cooling. Between development and destruction. Did Harrison tell you how many families he's burned out, how many people he's threatened? I've heard only legitimate business concerns, Carlton responds smoothly. Property negotiations can become heated at times, but that hardly justifies taking the law into your own hands. A rumble of thunder rolls across the sky outside as Sarah steps closer to the judge. The law? She asks quietly. Where was the law when the Murphy family's barn burned? When the Peterson children had to watch their home turn to ashes? Where were you then, Your Honor? Carlton's face flushes slightly. Are you accusing me of failing in my duties, Mrs. Mitchell? I'm suggesting that the law seems to work differently for William Harrison than it does for the rest of us. The tension in the store grows thick enough to cut with a knife. Daniel Anderson moves subtly closer to his shotgun behind the counter, while Mary watches the exchange with wide eyes. Be careful, Mrs. Mitchell, the judge warns softly. Your reputation may protect you from some things, but not from the full weight of territorial law. Harrison has filed a formal complaint about this morning's incident. As a judge, I cannot ignore such serious allegations. Sarah's hand doesn't move toward her gun, but something in her stance changes, becoming more focused, more present. The transformation is subtle but unmistakable, the quiet widow receding as Shadow Hand Sarah emerges. Then don't ignore them, she says, her voice carrying an edge sharp as a razor. Investigate everything. Talk to the families Harrison's men have terrorized. Look into the land deals that somehow always end in his favor. Do your job, Your Honor. But understand this. If the law won't protect these people, then I will. Is that a threat, Mrs. Mitchell? No, sir. It's a fact. Just like it's a fact that Red Harrison and her men came to my property this morning with guns and threats. Just like it's a fact that they fired first. You want to investigate? Start there. Outside, the first heavy drops of rain begin to fall, drumming against the store's tin roof. Judge Carlton straightens his coat, his expression carefully neutral. "I'll be in town for several days," he announces. "I expect you to make yourself available if I have further questions. And Mrs. Mitchell, I strongly advise against any further incidents during my investigation." Sarah watches him leave, noting how the townspeople outside scatter to make way for him. When the door closes behind him, Daniel lets out a long breath. "That man's been in Harrison's pocket for years," he says grimly. "Whatever investigation he conducts won't be worth the paper it's written on." "I know," Sarah replies, her eyes still on the door. "But his presence here tells us something important." "What's that?" "William Harrison is worried. He wouldn't have called in his pet judge if he wasn't." Sarah turns to Daniel, her expression serious. "That makes him dangerous." Mary steps forward, her young face set with determination. "More dangerous than Red Harrison and her guns?" "Much more," Sarah confirms. "Red Harrison is a gunfighter. She operates by a code we all understand out here. William Harrison plays a different game, with different rules. He'll use the law, money, and influence to get what he wants." Thunder crashes outside, and the rain begins to fall in earnest. Through the store's front window, Sarah watches as people hurry for shelter, pulling coats over their heads and ducking into doorways. "What are you going to do?" Daniel asks quietly. Sarah's hand unconsciously touches the grip of her revolver. "The same thing I've always done. Protect what's mine, and help others protect what's theirs. Harrison may have the law and money on his side, but I have something he doesn't understand." "What's that?" "Knowledge of what people will do when pushed too far." Sarah moves to the window, watching the rain transform the dusty street into mud. Harrison thinks he can buy or bully his way to what he wants. He doesn't understand that out here, on the frontier, there are things that can't be bought, and people who can't be bullied. A flash of lightning illuminates the street, followed by another roll of thunder. Sarah's reflection in the window glass shows a woman transformed, not just a widow defending her land anymore, but a legend coming back to life, a force that even William Harrison's money and influence might not be able to stop. "Daniel," she says after a moment, "I need you to send some messages. There are people who need to know what's happening here." Daniel nods, understanding in his eyes. "Old friends?" "Something like that. People who remember Shadow Hand Sarah and what she stood for. Harrison wants to play this game with judges and lawyers. Fine, but he's about to learn that the frontier has its own kind of justice." Mary watches the exchange with growing excitement. "Are you calling in other gunfighters?" Sarah turns from the window, a slight smile touching her lips. "Not exactly. But there are people out there who owe me favors, people who've seen what happens when men like Harrison try to take what isn't theirs. It's time to call those debts due." The storm continues to rage outside, but inside Anderson's store, plans are being set in motion that will change the territory forever. William Harrison may have money, power, and the law on his side, but Sarah Mitchell has something else, the loyalty of those who remember when Shadow Hand Sarah was more than just a legend, when she was the only justice some people ever knew. The war for the territory's soul is about to begin in earnest, and Sarah intends to make sure it's a war Harrison never forgets. Before Sarah can elaborate on her plans, the store's door swings open, bringing with it a gust of rain-soaked wind and Sheriff Jim Hawkins. He's a tall man with graying temples and tired eyes, wearing a tin star that's seen better days. His presence immediately changes the atmosphere in the room. "Sarah," he says, nodding to her while removing his dripping hat. "Heard about this morning's excitement. Thought we should talk." Sarah studies the sheriff carefully. Jim Hawkins is an honest man, a rare thing in a frontier lawman, but he's also practical. He knows the limits of his authority, especially when it comes to men like William. Harrison. Of course, Sheriff, she replies, though I suspect Judge Carlton's already given you his version of events. Hawkins moves further into the store, positioning himself where he can see both the door and the street through the window. It's an old habit, one Sarah recognizes from her own days of watching for trouble. Judge Carlton has his perspective, he agrees carefully, but I've known you longer than I've known him. 5 years you've lived peacefully in this territory, never causing trouble, never looking for it. Then suddenly Harrison's men start showing up with bullets in them. Seems to me there's more to this story. There usually is, Sarah acknowledges. Question is, do you really want to hear it? The sheriff's weathered face shows a flash of something. Regret, maybe, or resignation. Might not matter what I want. Harrison's got the judge's ear, and through him, the ear of the territorial governor. They're talking about bringing in federal marshals. Daniel Anderson moves closer, his face darkening with concern. Marshals? For what? Official story? To investigate reports of organized resistance to legitimate business interests. Hawkins's voice carries a hint of bitter amusement. Unofficial story? Harrison wants to make sure nobody stands in the way of his railroad, and he's willing to use whatever tools he has to make that happen. Sarah absorbs this information silently, her mind working through the implications. Federal marshals would change everything. They'd have authority that crossed territorial lines, resources that local law enforcement could only dream of. How? Along? She asks. Week, maybe 2? Takes time to get the paperwork through, even with Harrison's influence. Hawkins adjusts his gun belt, a nervous gesture he probably doesn't realize he's making. Sarah, I've got to ask, are the stories true? About Shadow Hand Sarah? The rain drums steadily on the roof as Sarah considers her answer. Some of them, she says finally. The ones about bringing justice where law couldn't reach? Those are true enough, Hawkins nods slowly. That's what I figured, and that's why I'm here, not as the sheriff, but as someone who's watched Harrison's men burn out 3 families in the past month without being able to do a damn thing about it. Understanding dawns in Sarah's eyes. You're not here to warn me off. No, Mom, I'm not. Hawkins glances at Daniel and Mary before continuing in a lower voice. Harrison's got judges and marshals, but he's forgotten something important about this territory. Out here, people remember who stood up for them when times were hard. They remember who helped them when the law couldn't or wouldn't. What are you saying, Jim? Daniel asks. I'm saying that when those marshals get here, they're going to find a lot of people who suddenly can't remember seeing anything unusual, who can't recall exactly where they were when certain things happened. Hawkins turns back to Sarah. And maybe they'll find some evidence about who's really been burning people out of their homes. Sarah studies the sheriff thoughtfully. That's dangerous ground you're walking, Jim. Harrison won't take kindly to interference, even the passive kind. Maybe so, but a man's got to look at himself in the mirror every morning. Hawkins replaces his hat, preparing to head back out into the storm. Just thought you should know where things stand. And Sarah, watch your back. Harrison's not the type to take humiliation well, especially not from a woman. After the sheriff leaves, the store falls silent except for the sound of rain and distant thunder. Mary is the first to speak, her young voice filled with a mixture of hope and worry. So we have allies, she says. The sheriff, the townspeople, we have people who are tired of being afraid. Sarah corrects gently, but Harrison won't care about that. He'll just see it as more resistance to be crushed. Daniel moves behind the counter, pulling out a leather-bound ledger. Then we need to be ready. I've been keeping track, names, dates, everything Harrison's men have done. Might not stand up in a territorial court, but it's true all the same. Sarah nods appreciatively. Good. We'll need that. But we'll need more than just records. Harrison's bringing the law down on us? Fine. Let's show him what happens when you push honest people too far. She moves to the store's back room where Daniel keeps his telegram equipment. First message goes to Marcus Reed in Prescott. Tell him Shadowhand Sarah's calling in that favor he owes from the Tucson bank robbery. Marcus Reed. Mary's eyes widened. The newspaper man. The same. Harrison wants to play with laws and marshals. Let's see how he handles having his dirty dealings splashed across every newspaper in the territory. Sarah's expression hardens with determination. Second message goes to Kate Quick Draw Wilson in Yuma. She learned what her old partner's been up to. Daniel's hands hover over the telegraph key. Kate Wilson, didn't she retire years ago? Like I did. Sarah's smile holds no humor. Some of us just got quieter, Daniel. Doesn't mean we stopped being who we are. The storm outside begins to ease, the thunder growing more distant. Sarah moves back to the window, watching as patches of blue sky begin to appear between the clouds. Harrison thinks he's fighting one woman defending her land, she says quietly. He's about to learn he's fighting something much bigger. The spirit of the frontier itself. Every person who's tired of being pushed around. Every family that's lost their home to his ambitions, they're all part of this now. Mary steps up beside her, young face set with determination. What can I do to help? Sarah turns to the girl, seeing in her the same fire that had driven her own youth. Keep your eyes and ears open. Harrison's men will be watching the town, looking for any sign of organization or resistance. We need to be smarter than they are, more careful. And when the marshals come? Daniel asks. When the marshals come, they'll find a territory that's finally ready to stand up for itself. Sarah's hand rests lightly on her gun, a gesture of readiness rather than threat. Harrison's about to learn that some things can't be bought, some people can't be bullied, and some legends exist for a reason. The afternoon light breaks through the clearing clouds, casting long shadows across the muddy street. In Anderson's general store, plans are being made, messages are being sent, and a resistance is taking shape. William Harrison may have money and power on his side, but Sarah Mitchell has something he can't understand, the loyalty of people who remember when justice wore a gun instead of a badge, and when Shadowhand. Sarah was more than just a story, told around campfires. Evening settles over the desert like a silk veil, painting the clouds in shades of purple and gold. Sarah rides toward her homestead, every sense alert for signs of trouble. The afternoon's rain has left the air crisp and clean, carrying scents of wet sage and desert flowers. But beneath the natural beauty, she can feel something else. A tension in the air, like the moment before a rattlesnake strikes. Thunder's hooves make little sound on the damp earth as they approach the property. Sarah notes fresh tracks in the mud. At least 3 riders have passed this way since the rain stopped. They weren't trying to hide their presence, which means either they're not professionals or they wanted her to know they'd been here. The answer becomes clear as her house comes into view. Painted in bold red letters across the front of her home are the words, Harrison sends his regards. Sarah dismounts slowly, her expression unchanging as she studies the vandalism. It's not the message that interests her. That's simple intimidation meant to frighten her. What catches her attention are the paint drips, still wet in places. Whoever did this hasn't been gone long. A flicker of movement in her peripheral vision confirms her suspicion. They're still here, watching from the rocks that overlook her property, waiting to see her reaction, no doubt, so they can report back to Harrison about whether his message had the desired effect. Sarah leads Thunder to the barn, taking her time, giving no indication that she's spotted the observers. Inside, she removes the horse's saddle and begins her usual evening routine. But as she works, her mind is calculating distances, angles, possible approaches. The sound of a bottle breaking outside breaks the evening silence. Sarah doesn't react, visibly, but her hand moves closer to her gun. The vandals are getting bolder, encouraged by her apparent lack of response to their artwork. "Come on out, Shadow Hand," a voice calls, words slightly slurred with alcohol and false courage. "Or ain't you so tough without the element of surprise?" Sarah continues brushing Thunder, her movements unhurried. She recognizes the voice, one of the younger cowboys from the Double Bar Ranch, probably hired by Harrison for this specific task. The man's reputation suggests he has more bravado than sense, especially when drinking. "Yeah, that's right," another voice joins in. "Hide in your barn like a scared rabbit." The sound of breaking glass comes again, closer this time. Sarah can picture them clearly in her mind. 3, maybe 4 men, working up their courage with whiskey and mutual encouragement. They're not gunfighters, not really, just local tough men hired to send a message. What they don't realize is that they're about to become part of a message of their own. Sarah gives Thunder a final pat and moves to the barn door, staying in the shadows as she studies the situation. 4 men, as she'd guessed, all carrying guns, but wearing them awkwardly. Their horses are tied up behind the rocks where they'd been hiding earlier, a tactical mistake that will cost them dearly. "You boys picked a bad night for vandalism," Sarah calls out, her voice carrying clearly in the evening air. The men startle, turning toward the barn. In the fading light, she can see their faces, young, uncertain despite their bravado. The leader, a tall man with a bright red bandana, takes a stumbling step forward. "Ain't vandalism if it's the truth," he slurs. "Harrison owns these parts. Now, you're just too stubborn to see it." "Is that what he told you?" Sarah asks, genuine curiosity in her voice. "That he owns the territory, that he owns the people in it? He's bringing progress," another man chimes in. "Railroad means prosperity. For everyone, prosperity." Sarah steps out of the barn, letting them see her clearly in the twilight. Tell that to the families whose homes have burned. Tell that to the children who've watched everything they love turn to ashes. The men shift uncomfortably, their earlier bravado beginning to fade as they face the reality of confronting Shadow Hand Sarah. The leader, though, isn't ready to back down. "That ain't our concern," he declares, hand hovering near his gun. "We're just here to make sure you understand how things are gonna be." "No," Sarah says quietly. "You're here because William Harrison is a coward who sends boys to do a man's work. He's using you, just like he uses everyone. The difference is, most people don't realize it until it's too late." The words hit home, especially with the younger men. She can see doubt creeping into their expressions, the first hints of understanding. That maybe they've chosen the wrong side in this fight. "You don't know anything about Mr. Harrison," the leader insists, but his voice lacks conviction. "I know he doesn't pay enough for you to die for him," Sarah responds. Her hand hasn't moved toward her gun, but something in her stance makes the men take an involuntary step backward. "And I know that if you draw those guns, that's exactly what will happen." The evening wind picks up, carrying with it the first chill of night. The men exchange uncertain glances, their alcohol-fueled courage evaporating in the face of Sarah's calm certainty. "Now," she continues, "you have a choice to make. You can leave now, take a message back to Harrison about how his intimidation failed, or you can try your luck against me. But before you decide..." She pauses, letting the moment stretch. "Ask yourselves why Harrison sent you instead of coming himself. Ask yourselves why he's hiding behind hired guns and corrupt judges instead of facing me directly." The youngest of the group, barely more than a boy, suddenly turns and starts walking toward the horses. After a moment's hesitation, another follows. The leader watches them go, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. "This ain't over," he manages, but the threat sounds hollow even to his own ears. "It is for you," Sarah tells him. "Go home, find honest work, because the next time Harrison sends someone to threaten me, I won't be in such a generous mood." The remaining men retreat to their horses, their departure lacking the swagger of their arrival. Sarah watches them ride away, their figures growing indistinct in the gathering darkness. Once they're gone, she turns to examine the painted message on her house. The red letters gleam wetly in the last light of day, a crude attempt at intimidation that reveals more about Harrison's desperation than his power. "You're getting sloppy, William," she murmurs to herself. "Sending boys to do your dirty work. That's not like you." A sound from the direction of the road catches her attention. Another rider approaching. But this one moves differently, with the careful precision of someone who knows how to stay alive in dangerous territory. Sarah's hand moves to her gun, but relaxes as a familiar voice calls out, "Evening, Sarah. Looks like you've had company." Kate. Wilson emerges from the shadows, her grey hair gleaming silver in the twilight. She sits on her horse with the easy grace of someone born to the saddle, and the gun on her hip has seen more use than any of Harrison's hired boys could imagine. "You made good time from Yuma," Sarah observes, walking forward to greet her old. Our friend Kate dismounts, her movements fluid despite her years. "Your message sounded urgent. Besides, I've been looking for an excuse to come north. Things have been too quiet lately." The two women study each other for a moment. They'd ridden together years ago, before Sarah met Thomas, before Kate retired, to raise horses in Yuma. There's grey in both their hair now, lines around their eyes that speak of hard years and harder choices. "Harrison's bringing in federal marshals," Sarah informs her. Kate's expression doesn't change, but her eyes sharpen with interest. "Is he now? Man must be worried if he's calling for that kind of help." "He's worried, all right, but not enough." Sarah gestures toward the painted message on her house. "He's still trying schoolyard tactics, thinking he can frighten me into selling." "William Harrison never did understand frontier women," Kate observes dryly. "Always thought we were like those delicate flowers back east, wilting at the first sign of trouble." "His sister's different," Sarah notes. "Red Harrison, she understands. That's what makes her dangerous." Kate nods thoughtfully. "Heard about that this morning. Word travels fast when Shadow Hand Sarah comes out of retirement." She studies the painted message again. "You know this means war, don't you? Harrison won't back down, not with so much money at stake." "I know." Sarah's voice is quiet but firm. "That's why I called you. Harrison's got his army of hired guns and corrupt officials. We gathered our own forces." A smile touches Kate's weathered face. "Just like old times." "No," Sarah corrects her. "This time we're not just fighting for justice, we're fighting for the soul of the territory itself. Harrison wants to own everything he sees, the land, the people, their futures. We can't let that happen." The night has fully fallen now, stars beginning to emerge in the vast desert sky. Kate unsaddles her horse, while Sarah starts a fire in the yard, its light casting dancing shadows on the painted threat that mars her home. "Marcus Reed's paper will run the story tomorrow," Kate says, as they settle by the fire. "Every dirty deal, every burned homestead, every family Harrison's men have threatened, it'll all be there in black and white. Harrison will try to stop it. He can try." Kate's smile turns predatory. "But Marcus has friends at every newspaper in the territory. By the time Harrison's men reach Prescott, the story will have spread from here to California." Sarah feeds, another stick to the fire, watching the flames leap higher. "It won't be enough, not against federal marshals and territorial judges." "No," Kate agrees, "it won't. But it's a start. People need to know they're not alone in this fight. They need to remember that out here on the frontier, justice doesn't always wear a badge." "Sometimes," Sarah says softly, "it wears a gun." The two women sit in comfortable silence, watching the fire dance against the desert night. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new threats, new battles to fight. But for now, they take comfort in each other's presence, in the knowledge that they're not facing this fight alone. The painted message on the house begins to dry, its threat diminishing with each passing moment. William Harrison might own judges and marshals, but he doesn't own the spirit of the frontier. Not yet. Not while women like Sarah Mitchell and Kate Wilson still draw breath, still stand ready to fight for what's right. The war for the territories. Future is just beginning, but the lines are being drawn. And when the dust settles, William Harrison will learn what others before him have learned, that some legends are born of necessity, and some fights are worth any price. "There's something else you should know," Kate says after a long moment, her expression growing serious. "I stopped in Stone Creek on my way here, talked to some people who've seen Harrison's operation up close." Sarah turns to her old friend, noting the tension in her voice. "What did you find?" "He's got more than just hired guns and corrupt officials. Harrison's been bringing in workers from the back east, hundreds of them, but they're not just railroad workers." Kate leans forward, her voice dropping lower. "Some of them are Pinkerton agents, disguised as common laborers." The news sends a chill down Sarah's spine. The Pinkerton Detective Agency is notorious throughout the territories, a private army for hire, known for breaking strikes and crushing resistance to corporate interests with brutal efficiency. "That explains the professional feel of some of his operations," Sarah muses. "The tactical precision when they burn people out." "It gets worse," Kate continues. "Harrison's not just building a railroad, he's building an empire. Every town along the proposed rail line. He's buying up businesses, water rights, mining claims. Anyone who won't sell gets pushed out, one way or another." Sarah stands, moving to check the perimeter of her property out of habit. The night has grown deeper, but the nearly full moon provides enough light to see by. "He's trying to own everything," she says quietly. "Control everything. And everyone." Kate adds, following her friend's movement, "The Pinkertons are just the start. I heard whispers about him bringing in some real hard cases, men who've made names for themselves in Wyoming and Dakota territory, professional killers who specialize in making problems disappear." Sarah processes this information, her mind working through the implications. He's preparing for war, a war he thinks he can't lose. Kate's hand unconsciously moves to her gun. With Pinkerton agents, professional gunmen, and the law on his side, Harrison believes he's unbeatable. A coyote's cry echoes across the desert, lonely and wild. Sarah listens to it, reminded of why she loves this land so fiercely. It's not just about property or rights. It's about preserving something pure and untamed, something that men like Harrison can never truly understand. "Tell me about these gunmen he's bringing in," Sarah says, turning back to Kate. "Names I should know. 3 that I heard mentioned. Jack the Snake Morrison. He made his reputation in the Dakota Territory, breaking up homesteader resistance. Samuel Cross, former cavalry scout turned hired gun. And," Kate hesitates, "Gabriel Kane." Sarah's expression hardens at the last name. "Gabriel Kane is dead. I killed him myself in Tucson 7 years ago." "Apparently not dead enough," Kate replies grimly. "Story is that he survived barely. Spent 2 years recovering in Mexico. Now he's back, and word is he's looking to settle old scores." The news should be unsettling, but Sarah feels an odd sense of calm. Gabriel Kane had been one of the most dangerous men she'd ever faced. Fast, clever, and utterly without mercy. The fight in Tucson had been one of the reasons she'd decided to hang up her guns and marry Thomas. "If Kane is really alive," Sarah says thoughtfully, "that changes things. He knows how I think, how I fight, and he'll have spent every day of the past 7 years planning his revenge. Should we be worried?" Sarah's laugh is soft but genuine. "About Kane? No. About what his presence means? Yes. Harrison's not just hiring guns, he's gathering people with personal vendettas against me. He's making this fight personal." "It was always personal," Kate points out. "The moment he decided to take your land, to threaten your home, it became personal." Sarah nods, acknowledging the truth in her friend's words. She moves back to the fire, its warmth a comfort against the growing chill of the desert night. We need to send more messages, she says after a moment's thought. If Harrison's bringing in Pinkertons and professional killers, we need to even the odds. Kate raises an eyebrow. You thinking about calling in the old gang? Some of them. The ones who haven't forgotten what we fought for back then. Sarah stares into the flames, memories of old battles flickering through her mind. John Eagle Eye is still up in the mountains. His people have their own reasons to hate Harrison's railroad. Maria Swift Herrera runs a ranch near the Mexican border. She owes me for that business in Nogales. What about Benjamin Wade? Sarah considers this. Benjamin "Black Ben" Wade had been one of the most feared lawmen in the territories before he retired to raise horses in Texas. He'd worked with Sarah more than once, and they'd developed a mutual respect. Send him a message too, she decides, but be careful how you word it. Ben won't come if he thinks we're just fighting against progress. He needs to understand what Harrison really is. Not a businessman, but a tyrant trying to steal the soul of the frontier itself. Kate nods and stands, stretching muscles stiff from the long ride. I'll send the messages first thing in the morning. But Sarah... She pauses, choosing her words carefully. Are you sure about this? Bringing in the old guard, starting what amounts to a private war, Harrison will use it against us. He'll paint us as outlaws, fighting against civilization itself. Sarah rises as well, her expression resolute. Let him try. The people who matter, the ones who've lived out here and worked this land, they know the difference between civilization and subjugation. Harrison wants to own the territory. We just want to keep it free. The fire begins to die down, its embers glowing like fallen stars. Sarah and Kate move into the house, but not before making a careful check of the surroundings. Hard years have taught them both that survival depends on constant vigilance. Inside, Sarah lights a lamp, while Kate spreads her bedroll on the floor. The painted threat on the outside wall is barely visible through the window, but its presence remains a reminder of the challenges ahead. Get some rest, Sarah tells her friend. Tomorrow we will start gathering our forces. Harrison thinks he's prepared for whatever shadow hand Sarah might do, but he's about to learn that legends don't grow in the telling for no reason. As Kate settles down for the night, Sarah remains at the window, watching the desert darkness. Somewhere out there, Gabriel Kane is alive, planning his revenge. Pinkerton agents are gathering, preparing to crush any resistance to Harrison's plans. Professional killers are being hired, judges are being bought, and the machinery of corruption is grinding into motion. But Sarah Mitchell isn't afraid. She's faced worse odds before, fought harder battles. And this time, she's not just fighting for herself. She's fighting for every family that's lost their home, every person who's been bullied or threatened, every piece of this wild and beautiful land that Harrison wants to own and control. Tishi. Moon rises higher, casting long shadows across the desert. In its silver light, Sarah can almost see the shape of things to come. The battles that will be fought, the prices that will be paid, the legends that will be born. Harrison's empire of money and influence is about to collide with something he can't buy or bully, the indomitable spirit of the frontier itself. Dawn breaks over Copper Creek with an unnatural stillness. The usual morning sounds, roosters crowing, wagons creaking, miners heading to their claims, are conspicuously absent. The town holds its breath, as if sensing the violence about to erupt. Sarah stands in the shadows of Anderson's general store, watching as a group of men in matching black dusters file into Judge Carlton's temporary office across the street. Pinkerton agents, easily identified by their military bearing and the way they constantly scan their surroundings. Behind them, a tall figure in an expensive Eastern suit strides purposefully, William Harrison himself, finally showing his face. Counted 12 Pinkertons, Kate Wilson murmurs from beside her. Plus Harrison's regular muscle. They're not trying to hide their numbers anymore. No, Sarah agrees quietly. They're trying to intimidate, make a show of force. The morning sun glints off Winchester rifles carried openly by Harrison's men. It's a deliberate provocation, a challenge to the town's authority. Sheriff Hawkins stands on his office porch, watching the display with a carefully neutral expression. "Message from Marcus Reed," Daniel Anderson says, emerging from his store with a telegram. Harrison's men tried to stop his story from running, failed. It's in every newspaper from here to San Francisco. Sarah takes the telegram, reading it. Quickly, "Harrison's going to be angry. The story names, dates, places, every dirty deal, every burned homestead." "Good," Kate says grimly. "Let him be angry. Angry men make mistakes." As if on cue, the door to Judge Carlton's office bursts open. William Harrison emerges, his face flushed with rage. He's a tall man with silver streaks, dark hair, and expensive tastes in clothing. But there's something hard in his eyes that no amount of Eastern refinement can hide. "Find her!" he shouts to his men. "I want Shadow Hand Sarah brought to me, alive if possible, dead if necessary. But find her!" Sarah watches as the Pinkertons spread out through town, their movements precise and coordinated. They're professionals. She'll give them that, but they're also outsiders, unused to frontier territory and the people who live here. "Right on schedule," she murmurs. "Daniel, get word to Mary. It's time." Daniel nods and disappears into his store. Moments later, a church bell begins to toll. Not the usual morning call to prayer, but a different pattern. 3 quick rings, followed by 2 slow ones. To most ears, it would sound like a mistake, but throughout Copper Creek, people who've been waiting for this signal begin to move. Harrison's made his first mistake, Kate observes, as the Pinkertons methodically search, building after building. "He's so focused on finding you, he's not watching his back." Sarah nods, noting how the townspeople seem to melt away from the streets, leaving them eerily empty. He thinks because he has the most guns, he has all the power. He doesn't understand. The frontier. A commotion erupts at the far end of town, shouts and the sound of breaking glass. Several Pinkertons rush toward the noise, their black dusters billowing in the morning breeze. "That'll be John Eagle Eye's people," Kate says with satisfaction, "creating a distraction just like we planned." Sarah watches as more of Harrison's men are drawn toward the disturbance. The strategy is simple but effective. Pull their attention in multiple directions, force them to split their forces. It's a technique she learned years ago, fighting larger groups of opponents. "Move to position 2, she tells Kate. "Wait for my signal." Kate slips away just as another disturbance breaks out on the opposite side of town. More of Harrison's men respond, their formations beginning to lose cohesion as they chase shadows and echoes. Sarah makes her way carefully through the back alleys of Copper Creek, avoiding the main streets where Pinkertons continue their search. The town's residents have done their part well. Windows are shuttered, doors are barred, and anyone Harrison's men try to question seems to develop a sudden inability to speak English. A flash of movement catches her eye. Gabriel Kane moving, with the fluid grace of a predator, leading a group of hired guns toward Anderson's store. Even at a distance, Sarah can see that Kate's intelligence was correct. Kane has changed in the 7 years since Tucson. The left side of his face bears savage scars, and he moves with a slight limp that somehow makes him seem more dangerous, not less. "Found you at last, Sarah," Kane's voice carries clearly in the morning air. "Time to finish what we started in Tucson." Sarah steps out into the street behind him, her boots crunching softly on the packed earth. "Shouldn't have taken Harrison's money, Gabriel. This isn't your fight." Kane turns slowly, his scarred face twisting into something that might be a smile. His men raise their weapons, but he waves them back. "You made it my fight 7 years ago. Harrison's just providing the opportunity." "Last chance," Sarah says, quietly. "Walk away, take your men and leave. This doesn't have to end like Tucson." Kane's laugh is harsh, bitter. "But it will. Only this time I'm not the one who's going to be left for dead. His draw is blindingly fast, faster than Sarah remembers. But she's not the same person she was 7 years ago either. Her gun seems to materialize in her hand, and the sound of their shots blend together into a single thunderclap. Kane staggers, a look of disbelief crossing his face as he looks down at the spreading red stain on his chest. Still so damn fast, he manages before crumpling to the ground. His men stand frozen, caught between loyalty to their fallen leader and fear of the woman who just outdrew him. Sarah makes the decision easier for them. "Your boss is dead," she says calmly, her gun still. "Ready. Harrison's not paying you enough to die here. Leave town right now and we'll call it even." They go, dragging Kane's body with them, leaving Sarah alone in the street. But there's no time to dwell on what just happened. The sound of gunfire has drawn attention. Pinkertons are converging on her position. Sarah moves quickly, ducking, into a side alley as bullets chip the wooden buildings around her. The plan is working. Harrison's forces are scattered, disorganized, reacting instead of controlling the situation. A whistle cuts through the air. Kate's signal. Sarah responds with a bird call that would sound natural to anyone who doesn't. No better. The pieces are in place. Now it's time to spring the trap. She emerges onto the main street, seemingly caught in the open. Pinkerton's and Harrison's remaining gunmen immediately open fire, forcing her to dive behind a water trough. It's exactly where she wants to be. "You're surrounded, Mitchell." William Harrison's voice booms from the direction of the judge's office. "Throw out your gun and surrender." Sarah smiles grimly. Harrison's still thinking like an Easterner, assuming that having the most men and the most guns guarantees victory. He's about to learn a harsh lesson about frontier warfare. A second whistle sounds, followed by the crack of rifle fire from the surrounding buildings. John Eagle Eye's warriors, positioned on rooftops since before dawn, open up on Harrison's men. At the same time, Kate Wilson and her group emerge from their hiding places, catching the Pinkertons in a devastating crossfire. The street erupts into chaos. Harrison's men, trained to fight in formation, find themselves caught in the open, targeted from multiple angles by opponents they can't even see. Professional discipline begins to crack as more and more of them fall. Sarah uses the confusion to move closer to the judge's office, where Harrison has taken cover. She can hear him shouting orders, trying to rally his men, but it's too late. The trap has been sprung, and all his money and influence can't save him from the consequences of underestimating the people he thought he could simply push aside. "It's over, William," she calls out. "Call off your men before more of them die." Harrison's response is a string of curses, followed by gunfire. But his shots go wide. The hands that are so skilled at counting money and signing contracts aren't as steady when it comes to handling a weapon. Sarah's return fire is precise, calculated. She doesn't aim to kill, but to pin Harrison down, to let him feel the fear he's been inflicting on others for so long. The gunfight continues for what seems like hours, but is probably only minutes. When the smoke finally clears, the street is littered with wounded Pinkertons and hired guns. Those still able to walk are retreating, helping their injured comrades. William Harrison stands alone on the porch of the judge's office, his expensive suit dusty and torn, his face a mask of impotent rage. His gun lies in the dirt where he dropped it after Sarah's last shot came too close for comfort. "It's finished," Sarah tells him, stepping into the open. "Your men are defeated. Your enforcer Kane is dead, and now everyone knows exactly what kind of man you really are." Harrison's face twists with fury. "Do you think this changes anything? I still own the judges, the territorial governor. I'll have you all arrested for this, every person who helped you, every family that sheltered you." "No, William," a new voice interrupts. "You won't." Judge Carlton emerges from his office, but he's not alone. Behind him stands a man in a U.S. Marshal's badge, one that Sarah recognizes. "Benjamin Wade," she says softly. "You got my message." "Came as fast as I could," Wade replies, his weathered face breaking into a grim smile. "Brought some interesting documentation with me, too. Records of bribes, witness statements about intimidation and violence. Seems Mr. Harrison here hasn't been as careful about covering his tracks as he thought." Harrison's face goes pale as he realizes the trap was deeper than he'd imagined. "You can't. I have rights. I have connections in Washington." "What you have," Wade says coldly, "is a date with a federal judge, one who isn't in your pocket as—" Harrison is led away in handcuffs. The townspeople begin to emerge from their hiding places. The street fills with the sounds of celebration, of people who've finally seen justice done. Sarah holsters her gun, feeling the weight of the morning's events settle over her. The battle is won, but she knows there will be others. The frontier breeds men like Harrison, men who think their money and power put them above the law, above common decency. But today, at least, the people of Copper Creek have shown that some things can't be bought. Some fights are worth any price. And some legends exist because they're needed, not just to tell stories around campfires, but to remind people that justice doesn't always wear a badge. Sometimes it wears a gun. Kate Wilson approaches, holstering her weapon as she surveys the aftermath of the battle. "Harrison's remaining men are retreating east," she reports. "John Eagle Eye's warriors are making sure they don't double back." Sarah nods, noting how the townspeople are already beginning to clean up, helping the wounded regardless of which side they fought on. It's the frontier way. Once the fighting stops, humanity takes over. "Miss Sarah," Mary Anderson calls out, running from the direction of the general store. "Red Harrison's been spotted heading into town with more men." Sarah exchanges a quick glance with Kate. They'd expected this. Red Harrison wouldn't let her brother's defeat go unanswered. The question was whether she'd come for revenge or something else entirely. "How many riders?" Sarah asks. "6, Mary replies. "But they're not charging in. They're moving slowly, deliberately like." Sarah considers this information. Red Harrison is too smart to throw away lives in a futile revenge attack, especially now that she knows the town stands united. This is something else. "Get everyone off the streets," Sarah orders. "Kate, take position on the saloon roof. If this goes bad—" "It won't," Kate interrupts with certainty. "Red's not stupid. She's seen how this plays out." Sure enough, when Red Harrison rides into town, she does so with her hands clearly visible, her gun holstered. Her men follow her lead. Though Sarah notes they're all experienced gun hands, she recognizes at least 2 faces from wanted posters. Red reins her horse to a stop in the middle of the street, her copper hair gleaming in the late morning sun. Her wounded shoulder from their previous encounter is still bandaged, but she sits straight in the saddle, showing no sign of pain. "Quite a morning you've had," Red calls out, her voice carrying clearly. "My brother's under arrest, his Pinkertons scattered, and Gabriel Kane finally meeting the fate he earned in Tucson. Impressive work. If you're here for revenge," Sarah responds, "you should know the town's still got plenty of fight left." A ghost of a smile crosses Red's face. "Revenge? No, Mrs. Mitchell. I'm here to talk about business." This catches Sarah's attention. Red Harrison has never been one for unnecessary violence. Unlike her brother, she's always preferred practical solutions to brute force. "What kind of business?" Red dismounts smoothly, though Sarah notices she favors her wounded shoulder. "The railroad's coming, whether my brother's involved or not. The territory needs it, for commerce, for growth, for the future. But maybe—" She pauses, choosing her words carefully. "Maybe there's a way to build it that doesn't involve burning people out of their homes." "You're proposing a partnership?" Sarah asks, genuine curiosity in her voice. "I'm proposing a solution," Red corrects. "One that benefits everyone. The railroad follows a different route, one that doesn't displace families. Fair prices paid for any land needed. No more intimidation, no more violence. Sarah studies the other woman carefully. And what do you get out of this? Control of the railroad project. With William going to federal prison, someone needs to take charge. Might as well be someone who understands both sides of the territory. The progress it needs and the spirit it needs to preserve. It's a clever proposal, Sarah has to admit. Red Harrison has always been the smarter sibling, the one who saw beyond mere profit to the bigger picture. And having her in charge of the railroad might actually be the best solution for everyone. I'll need guarantees, Sarah says after a moment. Written contracts, witnessed by Judge Carlton and Marshal Wade, everything in legal language that can't be twisted later. Red nods, unsurprised by the conditions. Already drawn up. My lawyers have been working on it since I got word of William's arrest. Every landowner gets fair compensation. Every displaced family gets assistance in relocating, if they choose to move at all. And the burned-out homesteads will be rebuilt at the railroad's expense, Red confirms. It won't make up for what my brother did, but it's a start. Sarah looks around at the town, at the people watching this exchange, with a mixture of hope and suspicion. The frontier is changing, everyone knows it. The question isn't whether to stop progress, but how to shape it. There's one more condition, Sarah says finally. You hire local workers for the construction. No more bringing in Pinkertons disguised as laborers. No more private armies. Agreed. Red's response is immediate. To be honest, I never liked working with Pinkertons anyway. Too rigid, too sure of themselves. Out here, you need people who understand the territory. A warm breeze sweeps down the street, carrying away the last traces of gun smoke. Sarah can feel the weight of the moment, the significance of what's being proposed. It's not just about a railroad anymore. It's about finding a way forward that preserves what matters while accepting the changes that must come. Sheriff Hawkins, Sarah calls out, knowing he's listening nearby. Would you witness these contracts? Make sure everything's legal and proper? Hawkins steps forward from his position near the jail. Already read them, he admits. Red showed them to me before riding in. They're solid, better terms than any railroads ever offered in any territory. Kate Wilson's voice carries down from her position on the saloon roof. Think about it, Sarah. With Red running things, we'd have someone who actually understands the frontier in charge, someone who's felt its bite firsthand. Her gesture toward Red's wounded shoulder makes her point clear. Sarah makes her decision. All right, Miss Harrison, let's see these contracts. The next hour is spent in Judge Carlton's office, going over every detail of the agreements. Red proves true to her word. The contracts are comprehensive, protecting not just current landowners, but future generations as well. Marshal Wade adds his own provisions, ensuring federal oversight of the project to prevent any return to William Harrison's strong-arm tactics. As the final signatures are applied, Sarah feels a subtle shift in the air. The war isn't ending. The frontier will always have its battles, but it's changing into something else. A collaboration instead of a conflict, a chance to prove that progress doesn't have to come at the cost of people's lives and dignity. One last thing, Red says as they conclude the business. I'll need someone to act as a liaison between the railroad and the territory's people, someone they trust, who knows the land and its ways. She looks meaningfully at Sarah. I'm no railroad woman, Sarah objects. No, Red agrees. You're something better. You're someone who'll fight for what's right, who understands that strength isn't just about having the most guns or the most money. The railroad needs that kind of wisdom, now more than ever. Sarah considers the offer, looking out the window at the town below. Copper Creek is already returning to normal. Shopkeepers reopening their doors, children venturing back onto the streets, life resuming its rhythm. But something has changed, something fundamental. The frontier is changing too, she realizes. The days of pure freedom and lawlessness are numbered, but perhaps they can be replaced by something equally valuable. A future where progress and tradition find a way to coexist, where the spirit of the land isn't crushed but channeled into something new. I'll think about it, she tells Red. It's not a yes, but it's not a no either. It's a recognition that sometimes the best way to preserve what matters is to help guide the change that's coming. As they step back onto the street, Sarah sees Mary Anderson watching from the general store porch. The young woman's face is full of hope. Hope for a future that includes both the railroad's opportunities and the frontier's wild spirit. That's what they're really fighting for, Sarah realizes. Not just to stop men like William Harrison, but to ensure that the next generation inherits a land where justice still means something, where progress doesn't have to come at the cost of the soul. The sun climbs higher in the sky, casting short shadows on a town forever changed by the morning's events. Sarah Mitchell, once known only as Shadowhand Sarah, now stands as something else, a bridge between the old ways and the new, a guardian of what matters most about the frontier spirit. The legend isn't over, but it's evolving, just as the territory itself must evolve. And perhaps that's the greatest victory of all, not just winning the fight, but finding a way to make sure it never has to be fought again. 3 days after the Battle of Copper Creek, Sarah rides out to the Murphy family homestead. The newly rebuilt barn stands as a testament to Red Harrison's commitment to change, its fresh-cut lumber bright against the desert landscape. Workers from town are finishing the roof, their hammers creating a steady rhythm that echoes across the valley. But Sarah isn't here to inspect the construction. She's following up on rumors that have been circulating since William Harrison's arrest. Whispers about other railroad companies looking to fill the power vacuum he left behind. "They came yesterday," James Murphy tells her, wiping sweat from his weathered brow. 2 men in fancy suits talking about competing interests and alternative proposals. Didn't threaten exactly, but made it clear they've got backing from some mighty powerful people back east. Sarah dismounts, taking in the sight of Murphy's children playing in the yard, a scene that would have been impossible just days ago when the family was living in fear. These men, did they leave any papers, business cards? Nothing written. Murphy's wife Ellen joins them, her face tight with worry. But they mentioned a name, Whitaker Railroad Corporation, said they're bigger than Harrison's outfit ever was. Sarah's expression remains neutral, but internally her mind is racing. The Whitaker Corporation has a reputation that makes William Harrison look like a small-time operator. They've been buying up smaller railroads across the country, using methods that somehow never quite cross the line into illegality, but leave broken lives in their wake. "You did the right to tell me," Sarah says, accepting the cup of coffee Ellen offers. "Has anyone else in the valley had visitors?" "Peterson. Family," James confirms, "and word is they stopped by the Reeves place too. Always 2 men. Always the same smooth talk about opportunities and progress." Sarah sips her coffee, watching the workers on the barn roof. Most are local men, hired as part of Red Harrison's new approach to building the railroad. They're investing their wages back into the community, helping it grow naturally instead of through forced change. "Miss Sarah," Ellen says hesitantly, "we signed contracts with Miss Harrison. Legal papers, all proper and witnessed. These Whitaker people, they can't just come in and change that, can they?" "Not legally," Sarah answers truthfully. "But companies like Whitaker have ways of making legal problems disappear. They don't use hired guns like William did. They use lawyers and bankers and politicians." A rider approaches from the direction of town, Kate Wilson, moving fast. Sarah excuses herself from the Murphys and meets her old friend halfway. "A telegram from Marcus Reed," Kate says without preamble, handing over a folded paper. "You need to see this." Sarah reads quickly, her face hardening. "Whitaker's been busy. They've already bought up 3 small railroads in California, and they're in talks with the territorial governor about reassessing Harrison's contracts. That's not all," Kate adds grimly. 2 more Pinkerton agents were spotted in Prescott, but these aren't Harrison's men. They're working for something called the Eastern Investment Consortium, Whitaker's front company, Sarah explains. They use it to distance themselves from others. Aggressive activities. She folds the telegram, tucking it into her jacket. We need to move fast. Get word to Red Harrison. She needs to know what's coming. Kate nods, but doesn't immediately ride away. Sarah, this is different from what we faced with William Harrison. Whitaker's people, they don't just burn barns and threaten families. They destroy entire communities. But they do it with paperwork and banknotes instead of guns. I know, Sarah acknowledges. That's why we need to change our approach too. Round up the usual riders, John Eagle Eye, Maria Herrera, anyone else who can still sit a horse and shoot straight. But this time, we're not gathering for a fight. We need information. What kind of information? Sarah's eyes scan the horizon, where heat waves distort the distant mountains. Everything. Bank records, property deeds, railroad contracts. Every piece of paper Whitaker's people have touched. They think they can hide behind their lawyers. Fine, let's give their lawyers something to worry about. Kate's expression shifts from concern to understanding. You're thinking about Judge Carlton's papers, the ones that proved Harrison's corruption. Among other things, Sarah confirms, William Harrison wasn't careful with his records because he never thought anyone would dare challenge him. Whitaker might be smarter, but they've been operating unopposed for so long, they've probably left trails too. A warm wind sweeps across the valley, carrying the scent of sage and new-cut lumber. Sarah watches the Murphy children playing, remembering why she came out of retirement in the first place. It wasn't just about protecting her own land. It was about preserving a way of life, a place where people could build their futures without living in fear. We'll need help, Kate points out. Different kinds of help this time. People who know their way around ledgers and legal documents instead of just gun belts. Sarah nods, already formulating plans. Start with Benjamin Wade. He's still got connections in the federal marshal's office. They might have files on Whitaker's activities in other territories. Then contact Marcus Reed. He's been writing about railroad corruption for years. He'll have records we can use. What about Red Harrison? She's our ace in the hole, Sarah says thoughtfully. Whitaker won't expect the local railroad president to work with us. They'll try to buy her out first, offer her a position in their company. Let them think it's working. Kate raises an eyebrow. You trust her that much? I trust that she's smart. Enough to see the bigger picture. Whitaker won't want partners. They'll want to own everything. Red knows that if they take over, all the changes we've fought for will disappear. The sound of approaching horses draws their attention. 3 riders are coming from the direction of Copper Creek, moving fast. Sarah recognizes Mary Anderson's horse in the lead. More visitors? Kate asks. Let's find out. Sarah swings back, into her saddle, but her mind is already racing ahead. If Whitaker is moving this quickly, they must be worried about something. Companies like that don't rush unless they're trying to prevent someone from discovering something important. Kate, she says as they ride to meet Mary, send a message to Maria Herrera. Tell her we need her connections south of the border. Whitaker's been operating in Mexico too. There might be records there they couldn't bury as easily. You're really going after them, aren't you? Kate's voice carries a mix of admiration and concern. Taking on a corporation like that? It's not like facing down gunmen in the street. Sarah's expression hardens with determination. No, it's not. It's more important. William Harrison wanted to own the land. Whitaker wants to own everything. The land, the people, their futures. They think that because they use paper instead of guns, nobody can stop them, and you aim to prove them wrong. I aim to remind them that the frontier has its own kind of justice, Sarah says quietly. They want to fight with lawyers and bankers? Fine. But they're about to learn that some things can't be bought, some people can't be bullied, and some legends exist Because they're needed. Mary Anderson reaches them, her face flushed with exertion. Miss Sarah, Whitaker's men, they're in town. A whole group of them, with some kind of court order from the territorial capital. They're trying to seize the railroad office. Sarah and Kate exchange glances. The battle for Copper Creek might be over, but the war for the territory's soul is just beginning. This time, though, the weapons won't be guns and bullets, but papers and principles. Tell Red Harrison to stall them, Sarah instructs Mary. Legal challenges, procedural delays, anything to buy us time. And send word to Judge Carlton. If Whitaker's using the courts as weapons, we need to make sure we have our own legal ammunition. As Mary rides back toward town, Sarah takes a moment to study the valley spread out before her. The frontier is changing, evolving into something new. But some things remain constant. The courage of its people, the strength of their communities, and their unwavering determination to fight for what's right. Well, Kate says with a hint of her old humor, at least this time we probably won't have to shoot anybody. Sarah allows herself a small smile. Probably not. But sometimes the hardest fights are the ones where you can't use a gun. Whitaker's about to learn that the hard way. The Copper Creek Courthouse had never seen anything quite like this. What was once a simple adobe building where Judge Carlton handled minor disputes and cattle-rustling cases is now packed with Eastern lawyers, in expensive suits, their briefcases bulging with legal documents. The air is thick with tension and the smell of pomade. Sarah Mitchell sits quietly in the back row, watching as Theodore Whitaker III himself presents his case. He's younger than she expected, barely 30, with sharp features and cold eyes that remind her of a desert rattler. His voice carries the polished accent of Harvard or Yale, but there's steel beneath the refinement. These contracts, Whitaker announces, holding up a sheaf of papers, signed under duress during a period of civil unrest, cannot possibly be considered binding. The territorial governor agrees, which is why he's granted our petition for immediate review. Judge Carlton, to his credit, appears unmoved. The contracts appear properly witnessed and notarized, Mr. Whitaker, including signatures from a federal marshal and myself. Your Honor, Whitaker's smile is practiced, perfect, and utterly without warmth. Surely you understand that the circumstances surrounding these agreements render them suspect. Armed civilians threatening legitimate business interests, a respected railroad executive arrested on spurious charges. This entire situation reeks of frontier justice being used to obstruct progress. Sarah feels Kate Wilson shift beside her, anger radiating from her old friend. But this isn't the time for confrontation. They're playing a different game now, one where quick draws and straight shooting won't help. If I may, Your Honor. A new voice cuts through the tension. Elizabeth Chen rises from her seat near the front, her presence causing a ripple of surprise through Whitaker's legal team. They clearly weren't expecting to face a Chinese-American lawyer, especially not one educated at Columbia Law School. Sarah allows herself a small smile, remembering the telegram that had brought Elizabeth to Copper Creek. "My father owes you his life," she had said upon arriving. "The Snake River Valley gang would have killed him if not for Shadow Hand Sarah. I pay my debts." Now Elizabeth stands before the court, her voice clear and confident. Mr. Whitaker's claims about duress are fascinating, considering these documents we've uncovered. She produces her own set of papers, records from 3 other territories, showing a pattern of similar behavior by Whitaker Railroad Corporation, using armed Pinkerton agents disguised as workers, arranging convenient accidents for landowners who refuse to sell, and most interestingly, bribing territorial officials to invalidate legitimate contracts. The courthouse erupts in murmurs. Whitaker's perfect composure cracks slightly as he leans over to whisper urgently to his legal team. Judge Carlton accepts the documents from Elizabeth, adjusting his spectacles as he begins to read. "There's more, Your Honor," Elizabeth continues. "Witness statements from California, Nevada, and New Mexico territories, all describing the same pattern. Whitaker Corporation moving in after local railroads are weakened by suspicious accidents or legal troubles that they themselves orchestrated. Objection. One of Whitaker's lawyers jumps to his feet. These allegations are completely unfounded. Are they? Elizabeth's smile is razor-sharp. Because we also have banking records showing payments from Whitaker's Eastern Investment Consortium to known saboteurs and criminal elements in each territory, including, Your Honor, payments to William Harrison's personal account dating back 6 months before his recent difficulties. Sarah watches as Theodore Whitaker's face grows increasingly pale. He hadn't expected this kind of resistance. Men like him are used to the frontier folding under the weight of their money and influence. They don't expect to face opponents who can fight them on their own terms. The sound of horses outside draws Sarah's attention. Through the courthouse window, she sees John Eagle Eye's warriors taking up positions around the building. Not openly threatening, but their presence sends a clear message. This isn't just about legal arguments. Your Honor, Whitaker tries to regain control of the situation. These documents are clearly fabricated. My corporation has a sterling reputation. A reputation built on buried secrets, Elizabeth interrupts smoothly. But secrets have a way of coming to light out here on the frontier, like these. She produces another document. A report from the Pinkerton Agency's own investigators, detailing their concerns about being asked to perform actions that cross the line from security work into outright criminality. Judge Carlton studies the new evidence carefully. These are serious allegations, Mr. Whitaker, very serious indeed, and completely unfounded. Whitaker's composure finally breaks. This is absurd. You can't possibly take the word of these frontier primitives over a respected Eastern corporation. Careful, Mr. Whitaker. The judge's voice carries a warning edge. Some of us primitives have long memories and surprisingly good reading. Comprehension. A sound at the courthouse door draws everyone's attention. Red Harrison enters, moving with the quiet confidence of someone holding a winning hand. Behind her comes Benjamin Wade, his marshal's badge catching the light. Speaking of reading comprehension, Red announces, I have here telegrams from railroad executives in 3 territories. Seems they've been waiting for someone to stand up to Whitaker Corporation. They're very interested in testifying about certain business practices they've witnessed. Theodore Whitaker III looks around the courthouse, suddenly realizing he's lost control of the situation. His carefully laid plans, his legal maneuvering, his attempts to paint this as simple frontier chaos, all of it unraveling in the face of organized resistance. This is your doing, he says, turning to fix Sarah with a cold stare. You're behind all of this. Sarah meets his gaze calmly. No, Mr. Whitaker, you did this to yourself. You and every other man who thought he could come out here and take whatever he wanted just because he had money and Eastern connections. You don't understand what you're dealing with. Whitaker's voice drops to a threatening whisper. My corporation has connections you can't imagine. Political influence that reaches all the way to Washington. Maybe so, Sarah acknowledges. But out here, Mr. Whitaker, we have something stronger than political influence. We have the truth, and more importantly, we have each other. As if to emphasize her point, more riders appear outside the courthouse. Maria Herrera and her vaqueros from the south. Marcus Reed with his printing press workers, miners, farmers, ranchers, all coming to stand together against the kind of progress that Whitaker represents. Judge Carlton clears his throat. Given the evidence presented, I'm denying Whitaker Corporation's petition. Furthermore, I'm issuing an injunction preventing them from conducting any business in this territory pending a full federal investigation. You can't do this. Whitaker protests. I'll appeal. You'll what? Elizabeth Chen's voice cuts through his bluster. Bribe more officials? Hire more Pinkertons? We have copies of everything, Mr. Whitaker. Copies that will go to every newspaper and law enforcement agency in the country if anything unfortunate happens to anyone involved in this case. Sarah watches as the fight drains out of Theodore Whitaker. He's not used to losing, not accustomed to facing opponents who can match him in the arena of laws and papers. But more than that, he's finally understanding something about the frontier that his kind never seems to grasp. Out here, people stand together. The courthouse begins to empty as Judge Carlton calls an end to the proceedings. Whitaker and his lawyers gather their documents, their movements stiff with suppressed rage. But Sarah knows this isn't over. Men like Whitaker don't give up easily. He'll try something else, Kate murmurs as they watch him leave. Men like that always do. Let him try, Sarah replies quietly. We'll be ready. And next time, he'll think twice about underestimating frontier justice. Elizabeth Chen joins them, her legal documents carefully stored in a weathered leather satchel. The federal investigation will take months, she warns, and Whitaker's lawyers will fight every step of the way. Good, Sarah says, surprising. Them both. The longer this drags on, the more evidence we'll find, and the more people will realize they don't have to bow down to corporations like Whitaker's. Outside, the afternoon sun bathes Copper Creek in golden light. The townspeople are gathering, drawn by the news of Whitaker's defeat. Sarah sees hope in their faces. Hope that maybe, just maybe, the future doesn't have to belong to men who think money can buy anything. Red Harrison approaches, her expression thoughtful. Whitaker offered me a position in his company, she admits. Executive vice president, salary that would make most men's heads spin. But you turned him down, Sarah says. It's not a question. Some things are worth more than money, Red replies. Simply, like being able to look at yourself in the mirror each morning. Sarah nods, understanding completely. The frontier is changing, there's no stopping that. But maybe, with people like Red Harrison helping guide that change, it doesn't have to lose its soul in the process. The sound of hammers echoes from the direction of the railroad construction. Honest work, fair wages, progress that builds up instead of tearing down. It's a different kind of victory than Sarah's used to, one with papers and principles instead of guns and grit. But as she watches Theodore Whitaker's expensive carriage roll out of town, she knows it's just as important as any gunfight. Because some battles aren't about who's fastest on the draw, they're about standing together against those who would take everything if given the chance. The Legend of Shadowhand. Sarah isn't just about guns anymore. It's about something bigger. The spirit of a people who refuse to be bought, bullied, or broken, no matter what kind of weapon is used against them. The mountain air grows crisp as autumn approaches, painting the high country in shades of gold and crimson. Sarah Mitchell stands at Thomas's grave, the first time she's visited since the Troubles began. The small cemetery sits on a gentle slope overlooking the valley, where the railroad construction continues at a steady pace under Red Harrison's supervision. You'd hardly recognize it now, Thomas, she says softly, placing fresh wildflowers on the well-tended grave. The valley's changing. The whole territory is changing, but maybe that's not such a bad thing anymore. The sound of approaching hoofbeats draws her attention, but she doesn't reach for her gun. Those instincts, while still present, aren't quite as sharp as they once were. The past months have taught her there are other ways to handle threats. Mary Henderson rides up, her horse's breath steaming in the cool morning air. She's changed too. No longer just Daniel's daughter, but a young woman coming into her own strength. The papers tucked into her saddlebag suggest she's been working with Elizabeth Chen, learning about the laws that shape their changing world. Thought I'd find you here, Mary says, dismounting. Elizabeth received word from her contacts in Washington. Whitaker's fighting the investigation, but he's losing ground. 3 more railroad executives have come forward with evidence. Sarah nods, unsurprised. Once people realize they can stand up to men like Whitaker, the truth has a way of emerging. Any word about his other activities? Marshal Wade's deputies found something interesting in Nevada, Mary reports, pulling out a document. Records of payments to a group of hired guns. They were supposed to cause accidents at competing railroad operations, but most of them disappeared with the money instead. A ghost of a smile touches Sarah's lips. John Eagle Eye's work. His warriors have been spreading the word through their own channels. Amazing how many hired guns suddenly develop a conscience when they learn who they're really working for. Mary studies the older woman thoughtfully. You planned this, didn't you? Not just stopping Whitaker here, but exposing his operations everywhere. Not exactly planned, Sarah admits, but I learned something important during our fight with William Harrison. The frontier's connected in ways most Easterners don't understand. We look out for each other, pass along warnings, share information. Whitaker thought he could isolate us, pick us off one by one. He didn't realize he was fighting the whole territory. The morning sun climbs higher, burning away the last traces of dawn frost. In the valley below, a train whistle echoes. One of Red Harrison's new locomotives, bringing supplies for the continuing construction. Miss Sarah, Mary says hesitantly, people are talking about you running for territorial council. They say we need someone who understands both the old ways and the new. Sarah turns from the grave, studying the young woman's earnest face. Politics isn't my field, Mary. I'm not sure the territory's ready for a former gunslinger in government. Maybe that's exactly what it needs, Mary argues. Someone who knows when to fight and when to negotiate. Someone who's proven they care about more than just profit. Before Sarah can respond, another rider approaches. Kate Wilson, moving with the urgency that suggests important news. Railroad office just got a telegram, Kate announces without preamble. Theodore Whitaker was found dead in his San Francisco hotel room, apparent suicide. Sarah absorbs this information silently, her mind working through the implications. Apparent. Elizabeth's looking into it, Kate confirms. But that's not all. His corporation's board of directors is falling apart. Seems Whitaker was using company funds to pay for his private army of Pinkertons and hired guns. The shareholders are in an uproar. Mary's eyes widened. So it's over? We won? It's never really over, Sarah says quietly. Whitaker's gone, but there will be others. Men who think they can own the frontier, control its people. The fight just changes form. Kate dismounts, leading her horse to graze near Thomas's grave. Speaking of changes, Red Harrison's been asking about you. Says she could use someone with your perspective, helping guide the railroad's expansion. Someone who understands the territory's needs. Sarah looks out over the valley, remembering how it looked when she and Thomas first arrived. The empty plains, the promise of a new life, the dream of building something that would last. Now the railroad cuts through that same land, bringing change with every mile of track. Thomas believed in progress, she says finally, but he believed it should lift people up, not crush them underfoot. Maybe that's what the territory needs now, people who can help guide the change instead of just fighting it. Is that a yes? Mary asks eagerly. It's a maybe, Sarah corrects. First, we need to make sure Whitaker's death doesn't cause more problems than it solves. Elizabeth should look into any other corporations that might try to move in during the confusion. As if summoned by her words, they spot Elizabeth Chen riding up from town. The lawyer's expression suggests she's already working on that very problem. Up. Next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any. Upload from us.